I decided to propose a topic today to you, which is just something that I think is quite unusual, and I hope it will be interesting for everyone. Shall we wait, Scarlett, a little bit more to admit others? How many people you're expecting?
We are quite a small group. I wouldn't be expecting too many more. I mean, it is just 7:30, isn't it? What do you think, Anne? Do you think are we missing anyone that normally comes?
I can't think of anyone off the top of my head. Oh, one more person.
What about Ian?
Ian's out this evening,
right,
and Christine's away.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I will continue admitting people. So even if they're a little late, hopefully they can join us a little later.
Okay.
Okay. So I don't know how you guys normally do this. I also run my Zoom talks very similar to what I will be presenting to you today. And normally they are about 2 hours. We start with a little saying hello, asking how everybody is. And then after 10 minutes, we begin with the topic. Let me tell you what I'm planning for today. And you let me know if that's all right with you. So I will have a presentation. It's a PowerPoint presentation, which if any of you wants me to send you by email that slides after, just you can pop your email address in the chat box and I will do that. Because the talk today will be a little bit more, let's say, technical, but I guess for you, you are astrologers or you have been doing astrology for a while. You're not completely, a beginner. So I hope that won't be too difficult to follow me. Just someone else is just coming up. Debbie? Okay, say hello to Debbie as well. Okay, so where are we? Just to let you know, I'm recording the meeting. Anyone having a problem with that? No, it's fine. Okay, if you want to give me your email addresses, or if you want, you can just communicate with Scarlett. I don't know how you normally do it, but I'll send you the recording, Scarlett, after that, and you can do with it whatever you want. Do I have your permission to publish this? I mean, I'm not sure if I will, but just in case, to publish it on my YouTube channel? Good. Okay. Well, thanks for muting yourself, everyone. Very considerate of you. So you, Scarlett, told me that you used to meet in person, and then when the lockdown happened, you started these meetings like that.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah,
Yes.
It's got its pros and cons, hasn't it? Because we can talk to connect with people who aren't really close to Manchester, and whereas normally we might not be able to have you here, for example. So that's great.
Yes.
But then you miss that kind of in person, and the certain things you can't really get that connection sometimes when you're not face to face. But
yeah.
We don't have this sort of general chit chat that we do, say, before we start a meeting or at the end of the meeting.
Yes, and you can have a drink together or something like this, which is
yes,
unfortunate.
Exactly.
But maybe we can do a bit of both, mixing it up. It's very similar to what happened to me. Maybe I don't know any of you here. I think I know Maureen. Maureen, have you been to some of my talks, or I'm mistaking you for someone else? I think you're muted, so I can hear you. I can't hear you. You are muted. Let me see if I can. No.
Yeah, I've unmuted myself. You do seem familiar, but I can't remember what the talk might have been or that I've been to.
Never mind. It's just your name sounded familiar, but never mind. So I'm a Bulgarian girl living in London for almost 15 years now. And I've been doing astrology for the last 6 years. I'm, let's say, quite new into it, but very passionate about studying and exchanging with other people all the time. I started my practice several years ago when I moved to Spain with my partner. And now we are in between the two places. We live, say, 1/3 of the year in London and 2/3 of the year in Valencia in Spain. So it was just an attempt to change things a bit after many years of working in London and leading a very busy life. And now we are kind of trying to balance between the two places, and we spend time in both places. But I go on with my astrology work in everywhere, basically. Now here in London, not so often. I organize my talks twice a month, inviting you to join me as well if you find what I tell you today interesting. But we have been doing these talks since the lockdown on Zoom. And just a few days ago, I realized that it's been almost 2 years now. And it feels like a lot more. I don't know how you feel about it, but time is passing so slowly since the trouble with the virus started. So I hope you're all right. I also had the virus recently, like you, Scarlett. It was very strange. It was quite, I mean, not very serious, but I'm obviously quite young, but it was a very strange feeling, very different from everything else I've had as a cold or flu before. Luckily now I'm better, but yeah, take care of yourself, everyone. I hope we don't need to go through this again. Finally, when I went to Valencia 4 years ago, I decided to, for the first time, to start offering consultations and talks, lectures on astrology. I specialize in psychological astrology, and particularly, I'm very concentrated on the work of Dane Rudier. You would see throughout the talk that I really respect this way of looking into it. And even though I'm not exclusivistic about it, I'm not saying let's not, consider anything else. I'm open to everything, but my approach is very psychological and, let's say, person-centered, as he calls it. The birth chart, most of all, is what I study, and I try to do as many consultations one-to-one as I possibly can to use that as a learning field, as I discovered that ever since I started my consultations and stopped only relying on reading books and theoreticizing all the time, this is when things started falling into place for me. So I'm not a specialist, I'm not that experienced, but I hope you would learn something new today, because I decided to select something that is very often omitted out there in books, in talks, in articles. I don't see a lot about the lunation cycle. And the lunation cycle is the name of one of the most famous books of Dane Rudier, where he lays out the method in very big detail. I'm not going to go so deeply today as we only have 2 hours, but I wanted to offer the lunation cycle to you as a method, as a way to work with the birth chart, and particularly with aspects. So, and in the first part, I will explain what the lunation cycle is and how this is, to me, a bit of a lost dimension of astrology. We normally focus on the zodiac and the different signs of the zodiac, the houses, the aspects more in a geometrical way. This is different. This is something of a different approach that maybe some of you know about, but I think it's extremely valuable and opens the door to figuring out something of a person that you don't know, but you're looking at their birth chart, or for yourself, that really makes it more dynamic and more interesting and maybe deeper, because I have discovered that, unfortunately, with most of the things you can read in different places, and there's so many resources nowadays, people are getting more and more interested in astrology. Very, very much of it is very superficial. So let's see what else is there that we may be able to discover together. And I suggest somewhere in the middle to make a very brief pause, just a break, maybe for 5 minutes. So you can go and pick up something, go to the toilet, whatever you want to do. And then, because when I start talking, I can't stop myself. So you are welcome to stop me at any time, ask questions. If something is not clear, please don't be shy, but just interrupt me at any moment, because it's great if this can be also a discussion. I will try to get away with the talk quickly, I mean, as quick as possible. So I leave a bit of time at the end, maybe the last 15, 20 minutes, so we can talk about what you think about all this and whether you've applied it also in your work, or how you can see you can possibly apply it. And the last part of my presentation is an example. I'm having a consultation tomorrow with a woman that wants to talk about the chart of her very young child. The baby is only 1 year old, and even not 1 year old. I think it's just several months old, a little girl. And I agreed to do this as an exception because I normally don't do such young children's charts. I will tell you later why. I think it's just too early. I feel like people need to be a bit older to have responded in some way of their own to the birth chart and to their experiences, so that we can draw some conclusions about their chart. But still, you see, there are many things we can find in the chart as clues of general temperament, general potential of the child, and so on. So what I will be explaining theoretically about the lunation cycle and then the aspects of how we can interpret aspects as a process, I will try to apply to that chart as an example. So I selected several of the aspects that this girl has in her chart. I will show you the chart too, so we can look at that together and interpret them this way, not the usual way. The usual way is only making a note about the angular relationship between something in the chart, two planets in the chart, let's say, any two we can pick up. And then following the standard textbook explanations about what a square is meant to mean, what an opposition is meant to mean, which is still valid. I'm not going to contradict it, but I will look at it from a slightly different angle and show you how sometimes we just put under the same category aspects which are called the same way, for example, a square. And when we see a square, we just take it as that, a square in the chart. But actually, there are two types of squares, and they're very different in meaning. The lunation cycle explanation, I hope, will tell you why and what's the difference. In the same way, we have two trines, two sextiles, and so on, only one opposition. But looking at aspects this way shows us that we need to maybe figure out what is really the relationship between the two planets that we're trying to interpret, what stage of their cycle they have reached, so that we can really see how the functions of those planets express themselves in the personality. Any questions so far, or are you ready for me to share my presentation? Go ahead. Okay, let's not waste any more time. I will share my screen now. If you can just let me know if you can see it. All right, great. So I've called this talk the lunar cycle, or the lunation cycle, or the moon cycle, however you want to call it, as a prototype of all cycles. And I think this is really the beauty of this cycle, that we can apply it again and again. And if we familiarize ourselves with its steps and phases and what they mean as a whole picture, this is giving us a perspective to everything else in astrology that requires to work with two separate factors, say two planets, that are in some sort of relationship to one another. You know that all of them move all the time, and they change their positions, not just in the zodiac, as we follow the ephemeris and we see where all the planets are in any moment by transit, but also they change their positions to one another. And this is revealing a picture of the universe, of the solar system that we are using in astrology, all the planets in the solar system, but everything there is interconnected and everything speaks to everything else. And my way of working with astrology and the birth chart is by trying, first of all, to see it as a whole picture and then break down into parts. Most people do the other way around. They list a number of different positions in the chart, for example, different aspects, different zodiacal positions, what is in what house, and they try to, in their head, figure out a meaning based on the individual explanations that we can find in books, for example, the cookbooks of astrology. You probably know, I forgot to ask you how many of you are practicing astrologers. Are you consulting people? Are you working with charts like this? Do you want to just give me a slight indication? If you want to raise your hand or something? Or you're just, great. Okay, so you probably know what I'm talking about then, about this confusion we very often risk getting into while trying to interpret a birth chart. If we don't use the holistic methods, but we use this option of trying to piece up different parts that at the end of the day may not make a lot of sense and may not give us a synthesis of what are the main things, the main themes in this chart. As you know that if we actually go deeper into it, we find repeating things in charts. And they're always indications that this particular thing is extremely important for the person. For example, you can have something in a zodiac sign, for example, in Capricorn, let's say, the sun or the moon or one of the personal planets in that sign. At the same time, the person can have lots of things going on in the 10th house, which is associated with Capricorn. And at the same time, Saturn could be very strong. For example, it could be on the ascendant, on any of the other angles of the chart. So we already, if we see all this together, we already sense that here with this Capricornian story, something is really standing up and obvious for this person. And it gives us a clue what to concentrate on and not to get too distracted with all the things out there. So let's start from the focus of what I want to talk to you today about, and that's the actual cycle of the moon. Now, what I'm really talking about here is the phases of the moon. But this part of astrology is not so widely known, widely used, maybe because even to know your position of the moon in the birth chart by zodiac sign, which we all know how important that is and how much this determines the basic character, the personality, that thing that we actually are right from childhood, and which is intrinsic in us and remains as this, we can say, inner child all along the lifetime, is as important as the sun sign, the zodiac sign that most people know about. But we need to calculate it in order to know it. Maybe that's one of the reasons why people don't really focus on the moon that much. But in ancient times, old astrology, when everything started, things were very different from what they are today. Today, everything is getting so much more psychological, personal, related to how we use the information to grow as people and to follow our own path. While in the past, everything was a lot more basic, biological, primal, survival-oriented, and it was to do with figuring out when next change can be expected, positive or negative. And things were really polarized for ancient people because they were looking at the sky and observing the changes of the moon's appearance during the month and how it grew, and then it grew as much as it can possibly grow, then started getting smaller and smaller and repeated the cycle again and again. And this was the perfect symbol of not just the relationship between what happens down here on Earth and what the sky offers us as a blueprint, but also how things down here follow this pattern that they could see, and then we can also see nowadays on the sky. And maybe that magic of observing the changes and not being able to explain to yourself where is this coming from and what's really causing those changes in appearance in the moon. It's moving from one place to another in the sky during the month. It's not rising in the same place. As we progress through the month, it rises in a different section of the sky. At the same time, it's either lit or not lit. At a certain point, it becomes totally lit. Well, in the new moon phase, we can't see it at all. So you can imagine maybe how magical and mysterious this experience was for people in the past that didn't have the rational knowledge and tools that we use today to just maybe symbolize things in our heads without even observing them. How many of you watch the sky as astronomers? Maybe not many, and not many astrologers do that. We theoreticize, we conceptualize, and that's also very interesting. But this thing with the lunar cycles is probably the most ancient base of our art that exists, and it was transformed all the time enormously, because at the time, I mean, I'm talking about ancient times before people really observed the planets and knew that at the end of the day, the moon is a satellite of the Earth. And all three things are involved in this interesting picture that we see every month. It's three players: the sun, the moon, and the Earth. If the Earth is taken out of the equation, this is not anything at all, because what happens is that we are seeing the changes in the moon because we are sitting here on our planet, we're watching the sky, and from our angle, it appears like the moon is changing, but what is actually changing is the relationship between the moon and the sun. They are a pair. They are two sides of a polarity, let's say. There is some sort of relationship, very similar to a man-woman relationship. That's one way we can imagine it. But don't simplify that much. I mean, I don't mean it literally. But there is so much about the so-called typical male out there expressing energy and offering it to the world as some sort of example, some sort of initiative is what the symbol of the sun is. And the receptive quality of the moon, that's the other way around, inwards, attracting something to itself and working with it. So ultimately, we have a situation where the sun gives the light and the power of life. And that could be as a symbol in nature, and then translated into the birth chart. We run on the fuel of our suns in the birth chart, and we need this sort of fuel in order to be feeling energized, motivated, so on. But only the sun is not enough. The sun needs a helper. It needs some sort of an ally, and it gets it as a mediator from the moon. The moon in the chart and in nature is this point in between that reflects the sunlight and gives it to the earth. If we have direct sunlight, we probably won't survive, as it will be too strong and too intense to work with and to absorb. But the moon is calming things down. It's actually not just reflecting it, but it's also distributing it. And what creates life on our planet at the end of the day is this constant interaction between the sun and the moon, the two luminaries, as they call them in astrology. And the ancients thought of them as two lights, the night light and the daylight. And they didn't quite, distinguish between, what is doing what at the time. And an interesting fact, I don't know if you know it, but I was very surprised and amazed when I learned this some time ago, is that when we look at the sky from Earth, we see the disk of the sun and the disk of the moon is roughly the same size. Well, the sun is a little bit bigger, but this is why we have the eclipses, as when they line up on the nodes, really the moon is able to block the sun or the other way around. So the reason why we can have those eclipses and we can see that effect is that even though the sun is so much further away in space from Earth than the moon is, they look the same because the distance between the moon and the earth and the sun and the earth somehow exactly compensates for their sizes. Obviously, the sun is enormous compared to the moon. But how interesting is that here on earth, they are the same for us. We see them pretty much equal. So now, before I move on to the next slide and see what this relationship really means between them in astrology, I wanted to explain to you very briefly something that Dane Rudier speaks about in his books. I haven't seen this anywhere else. So maybe you know this, but we have to make the difference between what we call the cycles of position and the cycles of relationship in astrology. There are two types of cycles that we work with. And the cycle of position is when you have something fixed out there, a fixed factor, something that doesn't move. For example, the fixed stars, the constellations, let's say. We know that the tropical zodiac of our Earth going around the sun during the year and making one full circle through the zodiac, this is the tropical zodiac, is not the same thing as the constellations in the sky, the ones that we call Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and so on. These are two different zodiacs. So the constellations, the sidereal zodiac, the path of the Earth around the sun during the year, which is a symbol, it's nothing there really. It's nothing physical out there. It's just our symbolical journey through the year and through the seasons that we then divide into those 12 equal parts, starting from the equinox in the spring and ending back in the same place next year. This is the tropical zodiac. So this is an example of a cycle where we follow the sun, and the sun is moving. It's going, it appears like it's going in a circle. Actually, we are going in a circle around it. But let's say the sun is going in a circle. It goes through all the signs of the zodiac in a year. And we can observe that. This is an example of a cycle of position because the zodiac is fixed in our mind. If you think of the tropical one, it is some sort of background out there that if you observe the sky, you can divide it into that. Like imagine there is this background of the zodiac divided into different sectors. If you look at the stars, then again, they don't move. They move actually a little bit, but so slowly, and it takes so many thousands and millions of years for the fixed stars to move that we say they don't. I mean, this is just making it easier for us astrologers to call them fixed stars. And the fixed stars are our reference point. They are out there and we can see the backdrop of the zodiac against them. So obviously every year the sun goes around the Aries point. We can see that, we can register it. But the sun is going around something that remains the same. So it's changing its position to a fixed reference point. I hope that's not, I hope it's making sense. It's only one thing really that we follow with these cycles. We can do that with all the rest of the planets and see how they change their places over time. And any moment they move, especially the moon, which is the fastest of all of them. It changes its position every couple of days and a bit as a regular cycle. And then obviously in 1 month, it will go through all of the signs of the zodiac. This is the fastest cycle of position we have in astrology. The slowest one so far is Pluto, 250 something years. So most of the time astrologers work with these cycles. What is where in the zodiac? What is where, and then we follow the transits and we try to make some sort of interpretations out of that. What about the other ones? They're called cycles of relationship. And this is what I think is, more interesting, a little bit more interesting, because here there is almost like you're observing somebody's relationship with another person. There are at least two factors involved. Both of them are doing something. Both of them are following their path. And they are also changing their relationship. So what happens is that we can pick up the sun and the moon as the perfect example, because this is the most visible demonstration of how this works, as we can actually see it every month. And they start their relationship at the new moon, when the sun and the moon are located in the same place, the same zodiac degree every month. And when they do that, something then follows from this and repeats itself again and again as a cycle. What follows is that because the moon is changing its place a lot quicker than the sun in the zodiac, I just mentioned that the moon takes just over 2 days to move from one sign to another. Today it's in Aquarius, for example. Tomorrow it will already be in the next sign, in Pisces. So a very, very quick thing is the moon. Maybe that's why we women that are mostly governed by the moon and in the best relationship with it, I guess, we are also a reflection with our monthly cycle, with our ever-changing moods and situations of the changeability of that factor. The sun stays pretty much constant. It's the symbol of the thing that remains the same, even though it still travels, but something in it preserves its essence, so it cannot really deviate too much from it. While the moon is constantly adjusting itself. And that's why maybe we can see it. The sun takes 1 year to go through the zodiac, while the moon takes 28 days, 1 month approximately. So what is going on with these two? One is much faster than the other. The moon will meet the sun in the new moon, but then it will not stay there for a long time. It will move forward, while the sun will remain pretty much where it is. And it will also move, but much more slightly than the moon. And I will now switch to the next slide so you can have a visual of this. This is a mini model of the cycle. We start at the top with the new moon. You see how the moon here is dark. We can't see it at all because on the new moon, we obviously have the moon blocked by the sun. This is a situation when the Earth, our planet, is standing in between the two. They are on the two sides, so one is blocking the other. And we can't see the moon at all. It's total darkness. And from there, it begins to become more and more illuminated by the sun because it moves forward. It moves from the new moon in this direction. I hope you can see my pointer. So it moves this way, counterclockwise, from the top. Gradually, we go through the well-known 8 phases of the moon. When we speak about the lunar cycle, everything divides in 2s and 4s. So first we divide it into 2 halves, then the 2 halves are divided into 2 more, mini halves. So 4 quarters is what we end up with. But at the end of the day, we have 8 phases of the moon. And during those 8 phases, what we're actually seeing is that while the sun stays in one zodiac sign and travels through one zodiac sign, which is, for example, now in this month, we are in Scorpio season. Anyone among you a Scorpio? Just curious. You, Maureen? Yes, me too. That's why I'm asking. When was your birthday? The 3rd of November. So very recently. Happy birthday. Okay, well, the sun in Scorpio started its journey to Scorpio on the 24th of October, which is my birthday, by the way. And then at some point, the moon caught up with it. And recently, I think just a few days ago, we had new moon in Scorpio. That happens every year during Scorpio season. We have them together in that sign. It's always a different date, as you know, and so on. But even though the sun entered Scorpio a bit earlier, we can say maybe that really Scorpio started properly with both sides of the story, the sun and the moon, with the new moon in Scorpio. And after that, we're just a few days after, because now the moon is in Aquarius. So this is just, 3 signs forward from Scorpio, 3, 4 signs. So about a week, actually, already. So what I'm trying to say here is that the moon moves forward. The sun still stays in Scorpio, but the moon goes through the next signs. And it's by the time it comes back to the sun, makes one full circle through this wheel here. By the time it comes back, the sun would have moved to the next sign of the zodiac. And eventually they would meet again for another new moon. But then next one will happen in the next sign of the zodiac, and in the next and in the next. So this is very, very briefly and, I hope easily explained what is going on with these two. But I'm going in such lengths telling you all this, even though I'm sure you probably know it, because I want to emphasize on the relationship between them. And the symbol of this whole thing is of something that begins a new journey. We can say it begins a new life, almost like a baby being born, or some process being born, or maybe something not personal. Say you're setting up a business, or you are beginning something, new education, whatever you can think of as a start of a new process that will have its own life. It will have its beginning and its end, is the symbol of the new moon. And all conjunctions in astrology are new moons, actually, if we think about it, because they mark the beginning of the relationship between two things, two planets. And then after that, it's a process, it's a cycle, it's a journey. And these two go through different steps in their relationship. It is following a certain pattern. And every step of that pattern is bringing us one step further into the growth of that thing. And if we see what is meant to happen in all of those stages, we can apply that formula to all of them. And the birth chart looked this way starts making sense differently. Later, I will demonstrate how. But let's quickly see what are the phases of the moon. Now, different people, different astrologers try to experiment with this. And after Dane Rudier, who died in 1985, other people also tried to rediscover the lunation cycle. And at the end, I'll show you a few books. But they were experimenting with dividing into 12 also, not just into 8 like here. But at the end of the day, came to the conclusion that 8 is really the number of phases that we are dealing with. This also comes back to the past, when people were just looking at the sky and seeing the sun and the moon, because this laid the foundation of everything being divided into halves and halves and halves. So using this model of 2, 4, 8, and so on, rather than, for example, dividing in 3s or in 5s or something like this. So the basic perception of people before they become very intellectual is dualistic. So one and the other, plus and minus, male and female, retracting and acting out, receptive and expressive. So everything is looked at from this perspective. And that's why the lunation cycle also splits first into the first part of it, the first half, which is from new moon to full moon. And then the second half, which is from full moon to the next new moon. These are the two hemicycles. And they are very different. Very different things happen in them. And it's basically a reversal, almost totally a reversal of what happens. So the culmination of the lunation cycle is the middle, the full moon. Because from the beginning, from when the moon was absolutely dark, absolutely invisible, we start seeing it little by little. 2-3 days after the new moon, we already see the little crescent appearing on the sky, and it's showing itself. So something is really almost symbolically getting born, and we can see it. Then it grows and grows and grows until it comes to the point when we see the whole moon. And this is the full moon phase. From there, it cannot grow anymore. This is the maximum it can go. So that's the symbol of combination of all cycles, of something in them getting, yes, you would say, how come combination while we're still in the middle of it? What happens in the second part then? Combination doesn't mean ending. It means reaching a peak of activity. What we're reaching peak of here is whatever we were doing in the first half. But then we will do something different in the second half, and it will also reach its peak on the next new moon, but in a slightly different way. So let's start with the first half. It's called the waxing part of the cycle of the moon. Waxing, growing, something like that. And here, it is all about action. It's about existing, being out there, doing things, asserting yourself. And really, we can maybe compare that. That's why I included this little picture at the bottom. We can compare that with any growth process in nature. A tree, a plant, or maybe a person. But during the course of life, we follow a similar trend, where in the beginning, before we are born, we are still hidden. Plants are hidden on the ground. They haven't bursted out yet, and we haven't seen them yet. This is very similar to new moon situation. And at the same time, they're preparing to get born. And something is like really trying to sprout out. Reminds me of which zodiac sign? Aries, the first sign of the zodiac. That's what it's doing as well, isn't it? I mean, we can make those parallels along the way, even though lunation cycle, 8 phases, the zodiac is 12, but it's so many similarities there that when it starts, it begins as a very, very vulnerable thing that doesn't know yet where it is, what it's doing, and what it's fighting for, what it wants from its life. But it's there, and it wants to assert its existence. Then when we get to the second phase of the lunation cycle, it's called the crescent moon, which is here. Basically, it's not one of those big circles that you see. It's actually between the circles, the orange ones, we have 45 degrees of the zodiac wheel, of all the 360 degrees. Because when we divide everything by 8, that's what we get, 45, 45, 45 all the time. So somebody born with the sun and the moon in conjunction, in the same sign, they will have one of two situations. They will have a new moon situation, or maybe they will have the one before it, the last one in the cycle, called balsamic moon. How do we know? Depends where is the sun and where is the moon. So I have my sun, just using this as an example. My sun is at 0 degrees Scorpio. My moon is at 25 Scorpio. So this is not technically a conjunction, they're too far apart, but they're in the same sign, and they are within 45 degrees from one another, isn't it? Because between 0 and 25, we only have 25 degrees. So I am a new moon type person, because when I was born, that was the case. And it needed to, I think 1 or 2 days before I was born, there was a new moon. So when I was born, it was still going on. We still haven't moved on to the next one. But if you were born with the sun and the moon more than 45 degrees apart, but the moon has to be forward, yeah? The moon has to be forward in the zodiac, not backward. Because if it's backward, we're going the other direction, towards the end of the cycle, towards the late phases of the cycle. So if my moon was somewhere at the end of Libra instead of at 25 Scorpio, it would have been just before my sun. They would still be conjuncting, but that's a very different conjunction, isn't it? And we have to interpret it in a completely different way. It's actually, we can say that we have other birthdays, not just the solar birthdays every year, but we also have every month a lunar birthday where the sun and the moon come to the same position to one another, the same relationship as they were when we were born. Maybe other signs involved, not exactly the same as ours, but every month we have that repeated. And this is something of a reminder of our situation, our duality. These are the two most important factors in the personality, the sun and the moon. They probably comprise more than 90% of the whole story. Of course, the other planets are also important, but here we have the essence of every person. And the crescent phase, to just continue on the cycle, is between 45 degrees and 90 degrees. Between them, the moon being forward. You see how with the 90 we'll get to the square between the two, because 90 degrees is a square. But what happens here is that this thing that was born is now getting stronger, is getting a bit more confident. Let's think of it as a child. The child is now learning to take a bit better care of itself. It's orienting itself in the environment and waking up for wanting to participate a little bit more, learn things. And you know, those phases of the zodiac, Taurus, Gemini, the early signs, they are about learning how to survive and how to gain tools in order to be asserting yourself more successfully. But you're still very young, still very inexperienced. So the early stages, the first one, the new moon and the crescent moon, can be compared to very young children that are very intuitive, very easily perceive the reality of things and can sense it even without being able to explain it. But they are a bit naive and a bit inexperienced and maybe jumping too quickly into things because the process is still starting. We're still very, very early in it. And if we think of all this as you're trying to realize a project, then the project is still in its early stages and you're starting to gather, to research, to brainstorm about it, maybe call people, see what you're having, whether you've got what it takes to realize your project. But nothing really happens yet. No battle is to be fought yet. Always in the planning stages. When we get to the first turning point in the lunation cycle, a major turning point, more important than the crescent, is the first quarter. This is the first time when the sun and the moon stand at 90 degrees or square to each other. This is the first square. We call it waxing square because we're in the waxing half, isn't it? So this square is a crisis point. Here, everything, when it gets there, experiences some pressure, usually from the outside. It needs to assert itself against the will of other people or some external forces that are trying to prevent it to do what it wants to do. Here is where the battle happens. This is usually called crisis of action. So here we need to be physical, really. We need to be active, to initiate and to show the world what we're capable of. And that's a bit like Cancer, maybe as well, because between the ascendant and the IC in the chart, the square, where we need to really stabilize and decide, are we going to make a U-turn, like the wheel turns, almost like visually turns here, and goes from coming down to now it will make a curve. So here something really needs to change. The person has to decide what works and what doesn't work, how to be more efficient, how to be more proactive, and basically how to do things better so that it can counteract or it can be a bit of a promoter to what it's trying to introduce. But you see, the whole half, the first half of the cycle of the moon is about something being born out of the past. We can say out of the karmic past. Every new moon, this is what happens. Something appears because there was a need for this to appear. A person is getting born because we need that person to come here and to play their role in the world. So this is a very, very good symbol of this process, of how we are trying to overcome something, maybe the inertia of the past, maybe some karmic complexes, maybe some problems that we don't even know about, but they're just weighing heavy on us. So on the new moon, this is a chance for a new beginning and for revisiting the situation and introducing something completely different. Or maybe not completely different, but something of a new, like a new game being played. And also it could be nothing wrong with the past, but just something new needs to appear and needs to, just as a positive force, introduce something that wasn't here before and we now need it. So gradually we try to do this. At the first square, we beat resistance. And when you see in a birth chart, square between two planets, you're going to expect that there will be some actual fighting for something and some actual physical struggle out there in the world, only if it is this kind of square, where I will explain later where what that really, how to calculate this and how to figure it out. But it's usually when the faster planet is forward in the zodiac from the slower one. So when after they have met and made a new moon situation, the first time they square each other, this is when we can expect this. Then the next phase is called the gibbous moon, and that's in between the square and the opposition between the sun and the moon. Another intermediary phase. Here, it's got something very similar to the sign Virgo, I think. Not exactly, not completely, but I think that's going to be a good illustration what that is. With Virgo, you know, we are just before Libra in the zodiac, just before the middle of the zodiac, which is Libra. And this very critical sign that usually deals with repairing something, making something better out there in the physical world, it's an earth sign, is usually busy correcting something or preparing, learning, studying, being like an apprentice to somebody, or the other way around, teaching people. You know, it all revolves around some sort of preparation or some sort of correction with Virgo. And that's also what the gibbous people, if you're born under this phase of the lunar cycle, you are kind of making some conclusions out of what crisis happened at the square and what you need to now do so that things run better. And, you know, you are preparing for the opposition, for the culmination of the cycle. And in this phase, we're usually busy with relating with other people and with figuring out how we fit into the picture of our, you know, our world. But it's like this corrective phase. Then when we get to the full moon, we come to the end of the first half of the cycle. The moon from now on is going to be getting smaller, like we're going to see less and less of it. And at the full moon, it is the opposition of the sun and the moon. The sun and the moon are sitting in two opposite signs, and they face each other almost like in a mirror. The moon sees itself in the mirror of the sun, and as a result of this, we can see it. And that doesn't last a long time, only a couple of days, 3 days, and it moves on to the next phase. But here, this is the most important turning point, because with the opposition, we really flip the cycle, and we're not growing anymore. We're not asserting ourselves. We're not acting out. We're starting to think about what happened in a way. This is called the cycle of consciousness. The first one was the cycle of action. So you see how totally different things happen in the two parts of it. The waning cycle is all the realizations and all the conclusions and all the results, also the physical results, like what happened after the full moon, of how much we managed to achieve what we were trying to do. This has its parallel to midlife crisis. You know, midlife crisis is when Uranus, the planet Uranus, reaches the half of its cycle. And this is age 42, approximately. Uranus takes 84 years to go around the sun, and it is a very convenient tool, particularly Uranus, to use as a measure for human life nowadays, because we know that in our times, it's very standard, very common. We can expect that someone can live up to 84 years. And we can say one full circle of Uranus. So the midlife crisis, when so many astrological cycles come together and they hit us all at the same time, and probably, even though I don't think of it as they cause something directly, but at the end of the day, we're dealing with cycles. And at 42, all of those cycles, Saturn is acting, Uranus is acting, also you've got a Jupiter cycle there. So many things happen, mainly the middle of Uranus, that cause this split of life in two halves, from birth to 42, and then from 42 to, say, 84 or beyond. And this is like, at 42, we've reached our full moon situation in life. Yeah, I hope that makes sense, how all of these things come together. So the full moon is really the culmination of when our growth stops and the reverse process begins, the disintegration begins, slowly but surely. But this doesn't have to be a death. It doesn't have to be only negative. Most of the time it is becoming negative, because after the culmination, we lose hope. If we can see perspective in our meaning of what happened so far, or if we cannot direct our energies into something which is more mental rather than physical, we may feel really, really bad about it. We may feel very depressed, very dissatisfied in the second half of any cycle, because we need to find out that, no, it's about switching our attitudes to something slightly in a different direction. Closing accounts, figuring out what we achieved with the full moon. If our project was very successful, for example, we earned a lot of money, we earned something else which is not material, but whatever, we now have something to give out. We have some advice to give to other people, we have some resources to share. So much could be done in the second half of the cycle if we are willing to let go. So the first half was about getting, achieving, gathering, earning, and so on. The second part is about the opposite, giving out, sharing, and teaching others, and so on. So the more you go forward into the second half, the more we almost like travel through old age, and we become older and older and older, more mature and more capable of contributing something to others. And this is the funny situation of someone being born at one of those late phases of the moon, say after the second square, especially the balsamic, which is the very last one. How would they feel when they're young? They probably will feel a little bit out of place, because there is something in them that is kind of ticking as a clock of an end of a cycle kind of thing. So these sort of people may feel more connected to historical events, to the past, to the history of their society, to what went before them. And they would be very focused on learning about this, but then also figuring out how to move beyond it, how to go into the next phase. By the way, Dane Rudier was born under the balsamic moon phase, the very last one, just as a quick information for you. And that's a very different feeling, almost like being mature before your time. Then if you are a new moon person, like I am, probably someone like me will remain very naive and very, how can I say, spontaneous and subjective in their approach to things until very, very late. But of course, this is not the only factor. You know that the birth chart has so many other things in it, and they all add up, and we can see maybe something different. But this phase of the moon when you were born is such a big part of you. It determines so much about your personality. And if you explore that further, I'm sure you would see that this is the case. I won't go too much into the phases in detail, because on my channel you can take a look at my page and find it. Some time ago, I did a talk on the lunation cycle in Valencia. It was a live talk, and there was a recording of this where we went through the different lunar birthdays, let's say. So what you are meant to be if you are a disseminating moon type, or if you are a last quarter type, or something like that. And you can see more about this. But here, I'm trying to get to something else, more to do with aspects in astrology. So that's why I'll skip this. And I think you can already, hopefully, figure it out and see that the later phases mean more about consciousness and wisdom and sharing than the first ones. So the second square, which happens the last quarter here, when the sun and the moon are also in a square, but this is the one where the sun is now being approached by the moon from the other side. So the moon is kind of starting to gradually get closer and closer to it, to join hands with it again. And this second square is what Deinudia calls a crisis in consciousness, where here we may really get at the crossroads again, but this time not trying to find out how to fight the situation, how to assert our will. You know, the first one was very Martian. We can think of it this way as well. The first one was Martian. This one is Jupiterian in a way, because this one is about, do I actually have a strong life philosophy, something of a belief system or a guiding principle? Do I really understand things in a way that helps me go through the next late stages constructively, and not feeling like now that the full moon happened and I'm no longer young, I'm no longer active the same way that I used to be, everything is lost and everything is finished. Very far from that. The lunar cycle demonstrates to us, and maybe that's its greatest psychological value nowadays, that we have to maybe think more about the second part and try to make more of it, because so many people don't. So many people just give up after the action part ends, thinking that this is all it's about. As we're very focused on productivity, on success, on outer things, and we're not so focused into the other side. So, yeah, I think I went already too long here on this, but this was the base of it, the main thing. And now the next slide is the same thing, basically, but just shown in two other ways. So you can see how these phases of the moon actually correspond to the aspects, the geometrical angles that the planets make to one another. And we can use the cycle of the moon as a step-by-step journey through the cycles and see how, through the aspects. And also find out that the aspects are not just what they are on their own, like taken out of context. A sextile is, always positive because it gives an uplifting feeling. It's an urge of enthusiasm and action and so on. Well, no, actually, the idea is that nothing is only positive or negative. Everything could be, depends on how we use it, how we interpret it. Everything could be like two sides of a coin, both positive and negative. There is no such thing as a bad aspect or a good aspect, but they are all just steps in a process. And I hope that you saw in the previous thing that the squares are crisis points. The opposition is a crisis point. They're not pleasant. They are disturbing us. They are making us change when we don't want to change. They are putting pressure, but they're also making things interesting, and they are giving the greatest impetus for moving forward in the cycle, and really for something to appear that is valuable. Because they say the most interesting people have the most squares and oppositions in their chart. Maybe that's the case. It's not very peaceful usually with prominent people, because they have those challenges to overcome. And yes, we may not like it when we deal with squares and an opposition, but it's necessary, because this whole thing is like a clock. Can we say that 3 o'clock is better than 8 o'clock, or it's somehow higher, or one is positive or another one is negative? No, they're all the same. They're not the same, but they all have their role. So if we look at that, all the aspects as steps in a journey, then we can see that they all need to just serve what they need to do when they come. So when two planets in your chart are in a square of action, the first kind of square, those two functions that they represent, there will be circumstances in your life where you would need to use these two things together, and something more dynamic will revolve around it. You would be forced to do something with these functions. There will be no way out because they make that square, and you would need to act on it. Another person that has them in a sextile aspect, but a sextile from the second half of the journey. You see how there are two sextiles, two trines, two squares? Again, they're not the same. So if I have the same two planets in a sextile from the second part, even though from this aspect, we expect something more actional, more like out there, it has this reputation of a very extroverted aspect, does it? But maybe it won't be, because it's the waning part of the cycle. And it will be more, I will probably have some sort of inspiration, yes. Maybe I would be acting in a sextile relationship way, but it won't be that visible. Maybe it will be more on the inside. Maybe it will be something that is not so demonstrative, let's say, as if it's the first one. You see, that's how it roughly works. So this second one here is simply dividing our wheel into small 10-degree bits, and actually one step is 30 degrees, as much as it takes for one sign of the zodiac. And those are the aspects that if we decide to divide everything into 12 now and not 8, we can see how in between here, the starting point at the top, the new moon, between the new moon and the first square, instead of having only one thing in between, as we had in the lunation cycle, we had the crescent, this middle thing. Here we have two aspects which we can say are very significant, and it's good to take a look at them if you're doing a chart. It's the semi-sextile, which is 30 degrees, and the sextile, which is 60 degrees. So we are moving with those 30-degree steps. So from 0 to 30, a semi-sextile, from semi-sextile to sextile, another 30 degrees. And then if we add another, then we're going to come to the 90, the square. Then after the first square, we have the first trine, another 30 degrees forward. Then the quincunx, and the quincunx is so disregarded. Very few astrologers use it. This is really, the quincunx is really the Virgo thing that I spoke about earlier, because it has a similar meaning. You can really interpret what this aspect does on this side, on the first half, like Virgo a little bit. When you get to the other side, again, we have another quincunx. We start from it this time. Everything gets reversed as a mirror. But this one is more like Scorpio in its process. I know I'm simplifying, but just to maybe give you another way. Then the second trine, a bit different from the first trine. That's between the opposition and the second square. And we have another sextile and another semi-sextile. So does it all make sense so far? Do you guys have any questions, or is that something that you're using yourself already, or it's relatively new way of looking into it? Part of both. Okay. Okay, well, there isn't that much more left. So on the next one, I wanted to show you, it's basically again the same thing, but now just a list of 6 aspects belonging to the first half of the lunation cycle, and the other 6 belonging to the second half of the lunation cycle. And it's to do with relationship between any 2 planets. Maybe if I go back just for 1 second to the previous slide before we move on to this thing. Oh, sorry about that. That was the next one. So here, I just forgot to mention that the sun and the moon, that's why we're using them as a prototype, because when you pick up any other 2 planets, you just need to ask yourself which one of the 2 planets is the sun and which one is the moon, symbolically. Let's see, for example, Saturn and Jupiter as an example. randomly. Which one of the two is faster, Jupiter or Saturn? I can see you, Kevin. I can't hear you, but I can see you said Jupiter. All right. Of course, because Jupiter is closer to the Sun than Saturn. So we expect that to be faster than Saturn. The very easy way to remember all of these things, which one is faster, or I mean, I don't know how you have it in your mind, but I usually imagine the solar system as the Sun starting, on one end and all the planets one after the other. And just, I always have at the back of my mind, if I think of Mars, that Mars is between Venus and Jupiter and exactly where it's positioned, because this gives the greatest key to its meaning, isn't it? So Jupiter and Saturn, in this pair, Jupiter as the faster one will be the moon, and Saturn as the slower one will be the sun. So the idea is that every time two planets join, and they always will have different speeds because, they're all different, and always one will be faster than the other. The slower one is like a sun to the faster one. And being a sun is something like an exemplar. It sets a new direction, a new tone. It says, now we are going to be beginning a new cycle and doing something together. I'm the initiator, the sun. I'm the one that gets the idea and is trying to find a way to promote that idea. Then the next planet, the faster one, acts as an agent to the slower one. It comes to it, it reaches it, they make a conjunction. And then when the faster one goes forwards and makes one full circle to come back to the slower, they imitate the lunation cycle stages. And the faster planet, step by step, going through those squares and oppositions and sextiles and all the aspects, it is gradually developing the idea and promoting it and seeing how much of it could be realized, what will be a success, what will not be a success, and so on. And then they make a conclusion when they come back together again and begin a new cycle. So I hope that's something you can imagine and you can apply to all of them. Later, when we look at the chart of the baby, we can see what's going on there. Now, this one is another illustration. We can say that the first half produces those aspects that we can say are involutionary aspects of action, of going out, of promoting something and being, offering something new, very basically said. And starting with the conjunction, 0 degrees, then 30 degrees from that is the waxing semisquare, 60 degrees waxing sextile, and we already actually went through these. Let's not repeat them again in the previous one. But then you can see how this is an increase. So on the bottom, we've got, after the opposition at 180, we've got 210, 240, 270. Actually, if you look, for example, at 270, that's actually a square. So the 270 is a 90 from the other side. Yeah, so it's also a 90, but we say 270 because 270 measures how much space it covered from the beginning of the cycle, from the new moon. Well, the 90 measures how much is left, so we're not interested in that. If we say 90, then we know that 90 is how much passed from the beginning of the cycle. So we are actually in the first half yet. So this is something you can find more about and interpretations of all of them in the website chaldea.com, which is chaldea.com. And on this page, maybe you know it, there is the Dane Rudier archival page where there is so many resources, articles, books, and so on for free that everyone can read. And this guy that is running the website, Michael Mayer, he actually came up with these pictures here to illustrate the aspects. And he's got this big article called Eon. Eon is the name for the whole cycle, where he splits it into even smaller. You see those little dots in the circles, smaller dots that we don't have any anything about here, there are also aspects which are important. So it's really up to us how much how many sectors we want to divide the zodiac or the wheel into. If we divide by 12, we get this. If we divide by 8, we get the phases of the moon. Each one is 45 degrees. If we go to something else, maybe we can divide, I don't know, through 4 and experience it this way, as quarter by quarter. Yes? Did you try to say something? Okay, never mind. So now let's see the example. I'm not sure how we are with time, but maybe before we see the example, if you guys want to have a quick break for 5 minutes, I will leave the chart for you to take a look at during the break, and then we can talk about it. Yeah, shall we do that? Yeah. Okay, great. So I will disappear for 5 minutes and I'll see you soon. Shall we start again, Scarlett?
Yeah, I think we're all here, aren't we?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is the baby I told you about. I chose this chart not just because it's fresh on my mind for tomorrow, but also because I thought this can be also like a transit chart, as it's quite recent. She was born in June this year, and it's only been a few months. And you know how the birth chart is actually a photograph of the heavens at the time of birth, a still picture. And this is what transits are at any moment, but we make a snapshot at the moment of birth. So this is almost like quite recent transits could be seen here in this chart because it's from the summer, and also it's a birth chart. So we can maybe use it as examples both ways. And you can ignore all the rest of the information. This is my way of using. This is just the format I use for my chart. But on the next slides, I will show only the wheel of the chart and nothing else, so it doesn't distract us. But here, maybe you can take a look at the aspects in the table just very quickly and see that she's got several interesting things going on. If we start the usual way, as most astrologers approach this, I know this is ultimately, everyone has his own style or her own style and method, but most of the time people, I understand, just try making a list. Okay, Moon square Jupiter, then we check what this is about. Venus square Chiron, and so on and so forth. The first thing I do, and this is just, I wanted to share my way with you. I look at the whole circle, and before looking at the planets even, I see what's the shape of this chart. Is there any particular shape, something interesting going on as a whole pattern? And you see how everything is almost on one side. It's contained almost entirely between the MC and the IC on the left-hand side of the chart. So nothing on the descendant side, let's say, apart from the south node, which is important actually, but no planets. Mars technically is in the 4th house, but between this opposition, Mars-Pluto, everything is on one side of that opposition, everything else is like the empty space on the other side. This is a very characteristic thing for interpreting, I think, a chart. Yes, some of them are all over the place, and it's not that easy to distinguish something specific like this. But this one is very literally one-sided. So we can make lots of conclusions out of that, but let's not do like a interpretation of the chart, but see the aspects. And I have made a list of several of them, but using that formula with the lunation cycle and seeing how we can discover other things, maybe interesting things about her personality. We can only guess. But one of the things that I would say that is almost certain is that this girl will have very, very strong connection with her roots and with her family. We have no idea whether these are going to be positive or negative, how she's going to play with that. But this is going to be a major topic for her, because the two planets which like frame one side of the chart against the other side of the chart are running exactly on the parental houses axis, the MCIC. And they are, I mean, no other two but Pluto and Mars opposite one another in the so-called parental signs of the zodiac, Capricorn and Cancer. So already many things point into that direction. But this is just beginning some sort of analysis from somewhere, picking up from somewhere. I don't always do it from one place. It's just something sometimes stands out right from the beginning when you glance at the chart. In other cases, you need to spend some time and maybe make those old style lists and see what pops up out of them, because sometimes that's how it works for me. But I use those additional things because I think they give you a lot of clues, like the balance of the elements, the balance of, things like this new moon before birth here on the right at the top. This is what was the last new moon before she was born. And that's another not very well-known thing in astrology that Dane Hoodier has some materials on. Not many, actually, even him. But this is another dimension of it, of explore what was the new moon before you were born. Was it in the same sign as your sun, or was it in the previous sign? Sometimes it's the previous sign. Like I was born on the very first day of Scorpio, the first day when the sun enters Scorpio, and in a new moon phase. But how come if it's not exactly new moon? The new moon happened 2 days before in Libra. So in my case, I'm a Scorpio, but the new moon was in Libra. Well, for example, my partner is also Scorpio, but he's born in November. And his case is the other situation, the other possible situation, where you are born a Scorpio, for example, and the new moon before your birth was also in Scorpio. And this, again, gives two different kinds of personalities. One are people who are somehow a mixture between two transitioning signs. And they, even we can claim they have something in their sun sign, which is pertaining to both sides, while there are others that are more focused on one particular sign in their sun. I hope that makes sense to you. But yeah, I get all of these things for someone just to see what may be interesting. Okay, so now that we had a quick look at the chart like this is some aspects. Oh, here we go. First of all, the sun and the moon. Let's see what is going on with her. Actually, that's one of the very first things I look at. What was the phase of the moon that this person was born under? And, some astrologers start like from sun, moon, ascendant, the big three, then they move down, so many different ways. But even if you want to do that, it makes sense to see what's the moon and the sun, but not just, oh yeah, she's got sun in Gemini and moon in Gemini. And we stop here just by registering the zodiac sign and the house. But what about the phase? The phase is a balsamic phase in this case. Now, hopefully here, if it wasn't very clear before, this is going to illustrate it really for you. The sun is at the 19th degree of Gemini. So 18 degrees, 29 minutes is the 19th degree of Gemini. The moon is also in Gemini, but it's earlier in Gemini. So it's behind it in a way. The moon is moving towards the sun. It's approaching it. So their conjunction hasn't happened yet. Or it has, the last one has happened a long time ago. We can say that way too. We saw in the previous page that the new moon before birth of this baby, sorry, I keep doing the wrong thing. Apologies for that. Here we go. So I wanted to just go back to this information here at the top. New moon before birth, 21 Taurus. So this is where the new moon happens last time before she was born. And so, yeah, it was somewhere here in Taurus. And then it started the cycle. The sun moved forward and the moon moved forward. The sun moved just a little bit from Taurus to Gemini. In that time, the moon went all through the whole wheel and came back here, again in Gemini. So a few days after the birth of that baby, there was another new moon, this time in Gemini. Does that make sense to you? Okay, so we see that basically she was born at the late stage of the previous cycle. And she would be characterized as a personality which is very connected. Another clue to point us in the same direction of what we identified in the previous slide with, where is Pluto and Mars and the parental houses and all those things, Cancer being very represented in the chart. This balsamic phase of the moon is very mysterious, very, it's expecting a new life to begin. It's very mature and very connected with the past, because it's like she's traveled almost one whole cycle, and there is so much to remember, so much to work with, to kind of realize. And we can see that people born as a balsamic moon phase almost like carry some sort of load emotionally. So that would be one of the things I would expect, that family history, culture, roots will be important topics. Then the relationship between the Sun and Mercury, for example. Here is the Sun and here is Mercury. Usually Mercury is somewhere close because it doesn't go very far from the Sun, but we have 3 different scenarios with Mercury, same sign as the Sun, the previous one or the next one. Here we've got it in the same sign, Gemini. So you see how that's different from the moon to the Sun, as the moon was behind the Sun and Mercury is forward from the Sun. And it's a 22nd degree of Gemini, which means that we can see how it's been a very short time since they met, Mercury and the Sun. Mercury came to the Sun, they made a conjunction in Gemini, and they only started their new cycle. So as far as her Sun-Mercury relationship in her personality is concerned, that would be a baby-like one. She would be more of a starter there. So the mind will function in a more spontaneous, outgoing, subjective way, is what we expect, because of the stage in which these two are. And I think we're beginning to see how in the chart some play is being we are in a theater or something like that. We are watching a movie, and all these planets are characters there. They're all doing something, and they're all talking to one another, but they are all in some sort of particular relationship to one another. They're not simply in an easy sextile or trine aspect or a difficult square opposition aspect. It's more than that, you can see. They are in a particular stage of their mutual relationship. And that can give you so much. If you now start using your intuition and your imagination and your feeling about the whole situation, and especially when the person comes and you can see them and you can feel them, and ask questions about how different things actually happen in their chart, because we can't really know from just looking at the chart like this, then it really comes alive in a completely different way. And you can make a list of your own chart, for example, and see which planets are in early stages of their relationship to one another, which ones are in late ones. Is there a predominance of one or the other? What's going on in general? And here, let's see a little bit more about her. I did the Sun with the personal planets. So the Sun with the Moon, the Sun with Mercury, the Sun with Venus is now the next one, which is now Venus is a little bit more forward in Cancer. And it's similar, again, a new moon situation, because even though it's a different sign, not Gemini, they're not more than 45 degrees apart. They're less than 45 degrees apart. So we said in the beginning that one phase is one 45-degree section. So between the Sun in 18 Gemini and Venus in 7 Cancer, we're still within that first step of the way. So a very, again, immature new relationship between them. Then the Sun with Mars is the same. Just Mars is a little bit more approaching the crescent phase. And then I switched to some very standard pairs of planets that we study in astrology and in the charts, like Venus with Mars as a pair, because you know that how can you interpret somebody's Venus if you don't know what their Mars is doing at the same time? It's never a complete story. Same with Jupiter and Saturn. To a certain extent, same with Saturn and Uranus and so on. So these several next ones are like that. So Venus with Mars, the emotional nature of that girl, how is she going to participate in this everyday interaction with the world, the Venus-Mars function, expressing herself, attracting others, just basically acting from the perspective of a single individuality on everyday basis, the instinctual nature. How is that going to function with her? It is a balsamic phase relationship, again, like with the Sun and the Moon. So here we see that the two major pairs in that chart, the Sun and the Moon and Mars and Venus, they are in the same phase, and it's the last phase. So another late kind of pointer in her. Then the social planets, Jupiter and Saturn. This is to do with the local situation of where she's born, the place, the country, the family, the culture, the society, but roughly in present times. And what's the circumstances? What is the situation there? And how this is going to be affected, by her and will affect her. And she's got Jupiter in Pisces, Saturn in Aquarius. Well, we had at the end of last year in end of December 2020, we had the once every 20 years Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, didn't we? It's a very recent event. And this girl was born, we can say, still within that event, because the distance between her Jupiter and Saturn that had recently met in a conjunction in a new moon in the first degree of Aquarius it was. Then when she was born, Jupiter was already a little bit forward, but not too much. So still new moon phase of Jupiter-Saturn relationship. You see, she's an example of someone that was born at times when a new political and social cycle begins in society. And her life is going to be marked by that fact that she's born on a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And so it's not only that it's a conjunction. Yeah. The next one, also very big with her. Another reason why I think this girl will be very affected by external things. It will be very important for her to fit well into the status quo of, everything that's around her. Because the pair Saturn-Uranus is another one like this, a bit similar to Jupiter-Saturn, but now we are speaking about the slightly more global and social trends and changes in the world that we experience. And this year, actually, we have 3 exact squares of Saturn and Uranus. The last one is now in December. So she was born on the day when one of those 3 happens exactly. So she has exact 0 degrees square between Saturn and Uranus. And I don't know how to interpret this exactly, but it's obviously she was born at a turning point. What kind of square is that? Is it a first or is it a second? It's a second, because Saturn is in Aquarius and Uranus is in Taurus. Out of the 2, Saturn is the moon, Uranus is the sun. Yeah, Uranus is the sun. So basically, Saturn is approaching Uranus. Saturn is going to, from here, travel down And at some point, obviously, both of them will move. Uranus will not simply sit there and wait for it to come, but for when they will join again, it's Saturn that will go to Uranus. So it's like the last quarter of the cycle. This is the second square. So socially, politically, out there in the world, we are all living through times of crisis of consciousness, not crisis of action. Yeah, that's the global picture. And this girl is born amongst that. And she would need to somehow personally deal with this as well at some point, especially with this Uranus in the first house, close to the ascendant. I guess that won't be something she will escape easily from. And maybe we can argue that one of those two planets will be the one that she chooses to, as her favorite, let's say, against the other. As there will be tension there. And if we try to imagine which one of the two maybe she's more likely to vote for, I don't know for sure, but there will be some sort of resistance from her to what is being imposed on her by the norms of society. As Saturn sits in the 11th house, which is social, while Uranus sits in the first house. So just speculating. But next one, now the last three things I chose, and we will finish with that, is other aspects. For example, she has this moon sextile Mars aspect. It's important because it's between personal planets, and it's also pretty close. Now we see the moon is right in the beginning of Gemini. So we can say the moon is closer to the end of Taurus. Yeah, so that's why it is making almost an exact sextile with a planet in Cancer, end of Cancer though. Even though it doesn't look like it on first glance, which is why I wanted to show you the tables in the previous one, so we can just register those aspects. They're not always very obvious when we see the wheel like this. So yeah, they are in a very close sextile, but it's the second one. So let's apply the rule again and see what's happening. Out of the two, Moon and Mars, which one is the fastest? Obviously the Moon. The Moon is always the fastest. Whatever else you choose to pair it with is always going to be faster than it. So the Moon being faster, she's like the big hand of the clock, which is another way you can think of this. The small hand of the clock is always the slower planet. The big hand, which is moving, and we can see it, is the faster one. So the moon is moving towards Mars from its back, and it's kind of coming to it again. So we are making the conclusion that this is not simply a sextile, but it's going to be from the second waning part of the cycle. And Moon squared Jupiter we have. Moon squared Jupiter. This one is also very close, 2 degrees orb. So Jupiter in Pisces, Moon in Gemini. And here we can see the first one, not the second one. Crisis of action. So again, her moon is going to have a crisis of action against Jupiter. So, or the functions, when these two functions mix, something very social and something very in-family personal mix in her life, there will be a clash. And this clash is going to be very active, very obvious, because the moon was recently with Jupiter, and now it's making the first square after separating from it. Okay? And the last one is Sun trine Saturn. Just to have an example of a trine also. So Saturn in Aquarius and the Sun in Gemini. You tell me about, well, actually I've written it down, so it's not interesting. Yeah, it's the first one, because here we are having the Sun separate from Saturn. Yeah, so this is very easy actually, if you think of it, because she was born in June when the Sun is in Gemini. Now, the sun is in Aquarius in February. So earlier in the year, Saturn was still in Aquarius in February. So that's when the sun was together with it. From February to June, the sun moved forward and now came to the trine aspect from Saturn. So the sun will be somehow in an agreeable relationship with Saturn and will be a promoter of something Saturnian, while the moon will be rebelling against Jupiterian stuff. So this is just roughly what's emerging from this. Any questions? Okay.
Do you think that she's going to be some kind of a prominent person with Pluto there, and she's going to like sort of fight for a cause with the this Uranus and is it Saturn? Is it square or trine?
Yeah, it's a square exact between Saturn and Uranus, yes.
Yeah. Do you think she's possibly going to be fighting for some kind of equality, some kind of, I can't think of the words right now, but
sort of cause, yeah.
With it being in Aquarius as well, Saturn and Uranus being in Taurus, there's sort of maybe a link there as well to the type of thing. It just seems to me like she's going to be a protester, but not one that would go out on the street. Someone who has some kudos, someone who is known and famous or something like that, for already. But she just won't let things rest. She won't give up on something. She's from a very
strong-willed, isn't she? Maybe. Yeah, I can see where you come from here, and I agree with you. We can only guess, of course, but Pluto on the 10th house, almost on the cusp with the MC, is very strong indicator. Not that much that she'll be successful, or prominent, or famous, something like this, but that she's going to be attracting larger groups of people with being an exemplar in one way or another. Yeah, and she would be having this power of persuasion if she decides to use it, but we don't know if she's gonna decide to use it. Yeah.
Well, I think she'll start to use it in the home. I think
the Uranus points in that direction. Yes.
Yeah, and no, when she's a young person, she's going to start because she's got that Mars down there in the 4th, opposing the Pluto there. So it's like power struggles at home from when she starts. And that Uranus near her ascendant and in Taurus with the stubbornness, the determination. I pity the parents.
Well, maybe it could be the other way around. Who knows? Maybe she can be very agreeable in a way, so that all those planets are there to wake her up and make her move, make her kind of resist something that's not good for her. This Mars, which is down in the 4th house in Cancer, this cardinal sign Cancer in its own house in a way, maybe she could be too reliant on family base and so on. And while the situation out there may not be very good, for example, let me give you a bit of a clue, because see how things are very difficult to interpret if we don't know anything about the person. So it's the parents are from 2 different countries. So the mother is American, while the father is Spanish, and they live in Spain. But she is the 5th child. Now, the father has 3 children with, not with her mother. Then they have together one other child, these parents. And this is the 2nd child of this couple. So a couple with two children, she's the 2nd one, and then the father has 3 more. And two different cultures, two different societies, completely different customs, and so on and so forth. The actual mother and father are very different. The father is a Cancer, the mother is a Scorpio. The mother is a Scorpio with moon in Taurus. You see how charts of parents very often somehow reflected directly in the child. And yeah, it's when I first saw the chart, I thought, oh, double Gemini, she must be very lively, she must be very extroverted. The only feedback I currently have from the mother is that the child is actually very into herself for the moment. And she's saying she almost like looks at something and thinks, and almost like she feels like she's thinking of something, even though she's still very little. And observant is the word I was looking for. So I don't know. What else stands out for you? And just to play with
the Sun and the Mercury practically conjunct.
Yeah.
Does that mean that it's Mercury is combust?
Not exactly. It has to be absolutely exact to be combust.
All right.
I think this is just a very close conjunction, which is still very strong. I mean, it's in Gemini, so that's a very big Gemini.
Yeah, big.
It seems like she will be very busy. Her life will happen, looking at the houses, will happen mostly around figuring out what she's about, what she believes in, and what she wants to do with her life, kind of stabilizing herself. This is the journey from ascendant to IC, and then making some sort of difference out there in the bigger world. But what is missing is what happens with relationships, and one-to-one relationships especially, and whether she would want to mix with other people, because I think it's likely that this chart will produce someone that at least initially is very introverted, regardless of the Gemini. The Gemini can be totally inward, like she can be a compulsive reader, or she can still be a very good communicator, but she may not want to do this all the time, like out there. It's just my guess.
But do you think she may be a good communicator in her the way she earns a living? You know, some kind of teacher or speaker or something. I know it's not the sixth house, but
yeah,
the second house being how she may earn a living. Maybe she'd be a singer. You know, I know that goes sometimes with Venus, but
well, my question is probably going to be, does it really matter what will actually happen? Maybe I should say, I was thinking, what do I say to the mother? Because it's a bit tricky, this one, isn't it? You can't get any feedback because you don't know what the child is still not doing anything. And there may be along the way something that is an event that traumatizes the child, and they kind of go back in their development. They don't really follow the chart, or the other way around. So we don't know. But see, what is interesting also is that by progression, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with progressions, because of this phase of the moon that she was born under, the balsamic last phase, we see that when she's very young, she's going to experience for the first time progress new moon. This is another big topic that I don't want to go into too much, but the progress new moon for every person, when you have it, is the beginning of a large 30-year cycle, which is extremely important for everyone. And every time we have those turning points, we can really split our life later and say, yeah, my life before and after that period. And she's going to experience that very early, maybe not even without any events or anything interesting happening. But I guess something will happen behind the scenes, or something will happen. Maybe the family will move. Maybe another child will appear. Maybe something else. You see, these personal planets are all stuck around second, third, fourth house. So we expect that this child will be dealing a lot with the siblings, with the family, with the extended family. There'll be no escape out of that. And she may feel okay or not among them. Almost like I feel like she would be destined to deal with family stuff. Even if she wants to just be free, Uranus in the first house, just follow her own passion and journey and explore. Maybe the curiosity of the Gemini will lead us into directions where someone will be putting constraints and saying, no, we can't do that, or we can't go there, or this is not allowed, or things like this. But she has Sun in the second house. So at the end of the day, I think everything in the chart boils down to back to the Sun. And this is the main purpose, to realize the Sun in the best possible way according to the recipe of the chart. And it's maybe something to do again with using the genetic material, using the resources of the past of the family to do something with those resources, to build something with them. And that could be great for her if she uses that and does that. But
is there any special religion with the families? Have they both got different religions, the mum and dad?
I guess they do, but I don't think, because they're relatively young people and pretty modern people, let's say, they're not particularly religious. The girl is American, so I don't remember if she had officially some other faith from the Catholic faith is in Spain. Spain is quite religious. I think the family of the father of the child is very close-knit family. And there were lots of complications also around him having 3 other children from another woman and having to deal with that side of the family too. And in Spain, it's in the culture to be very close to your parents. This man is a Cancer with moon in Taurus. So only that combination tells you how much more likely it is for him to be a more traditional, down-to-earth, family-oriented guy. And she's a Scorpio with moon in Pisces. And she doesn't, her father has passed away a long time ago. The mother is in the United States. So obviously, it's like on one side, very family connections, strong family connections. On the other side, not that much. So the baby could be caught in the middle somehow later, I guess. There may be some sort of drama. By the way, the Sun and the Moon as a relationship between them in the chart could be what's the father-mother relationship about. I think, I don't know if you use this as well. Like if it's an opposition between the Sun and the Moon and someone's born on a full moon, almost certainly the 2 parents are very different people. They either are in a conflict, a big conflict together, or they simply are very different. Yeah, so something there is a discrepancy, or the child is very close to one but very distant from the other. Something like that. She, I don't know how it's going to be with her. It's a new family, relatively new family. So they had their other child just about 2 years ago, and now this is the second child. So I guess it's too early to say, but.
I just wondered, with the Jupiter in the 11th house, I just wondered if that was possibly some kind, is it just in Pisces? Yeah. Yeah. I just wondered if it was some kind of religious kind of group, that she might go towards.
That's a very interesting observation, I think, Maureen, because I went back to this because you see, it's always very important when some planet is in aspect to the nodes. And you spotted probably that triangle pointing to Jupiter. Jupiter squares both of the nodes, and Jupiter in a very social sign, in a sign that it used to rule, Pisces, in the 11th house. So if we put 2 and 2 together, we can really maybe expect that she would be somehow caught in the decision what to believe in, what to pay allegiance to, whether she's happy with what society offers her as options, or whether she wants to explore something else. Jupiter won't be easy. And maybe she's coming from a karmic, let's say, Jupiterian situation also.
I would say that with that Neptune in Pisces in the 12th, it is going to either be very spiritual or be a bit of a martyr.
Neptune is probably the most important outer planet in that chart because it squares the Sun and Mercury. And as you said, it's a triple one, like Pisces, Neptune, 12th house. Very active Neptune, yes, yes. And actually Jupiter and Neptune, they are connected. As they were both ruled, Jupiter ruled both Pisces and Sagittarius in the past. So it's like a very repeating pattern we can already see here. Something social, really. Pluto in the 12th house that Maureen spotted in the beginning. Saturn exactly on the cusp between the 10th and the 11th. Yeah. Maybe the South Node can give us the answer. That she's coming from a story where she was already in a Jupiterian way, Sagittarius, involved with other people. And maybe she was, it's just a guess, because I'm always looking for a problem in the past of the South Node. Maybe it was too much of a compliance with whatever was kind of dictated by, say, the partner or the family or somebody else. And now she's born with the moon conjunct the North Node in Gemini in the 1st house, with Uranus in the 1st house, almost like balancing factors on the other side, saying, now assert yourself, find yourself, your voice, your feeling about it. Don't always comply. And I guess all those planets at the top of the chart, the slow planets there, Pluto, Neptune, Saturn, they would put pressure on her, I think. Somehow, she won't be comfortable in the world, I think. And that's what will cause the rebellion eventually.
Well, everything seems to be, at the top of the chart, seems to be connected to the South Node in one way or another, you know, trine squares, and even Chiron.
Yeah.
And then it links across, Neptune links across to Pluto, and which fires again back down to Mars. So I mean, but it's all on the I side of the chart, isn't it? It's all about, like you said, it's all about her. You know, it's just, well, I suppose Uranus on the ascendant or near the ascendant is a very individual, independent person, normally, who looks really different, you know, appearance-wise as well. They stand out because they are either very, very tall or, you know,
something unusual about them.
Big, thick head of hair or something like that, you know, something striking about them, you know, the difference.
It's not always the appearance. I have this very direct example. My partner has Uranus exactly on the ascendant and conjunct the Sun, so together on the ascendant. And it's nothing strange in the appearance as much as just the overall personality has this, you know, unusualness about it. There is always, you're right, there is always something that's outside of the norm. And that's the point with Uranus. Of course, depends which sign and what, but maybe you're right here because it's Taurus. And you know how Taurus ascendant is really about the physical appearance more than anything else.
Yeah.
And it's possible that it comes out as she looks strange in one way or another. She's still too little to know, but it will be interesting to see her growing up. And yeah, I just forgot what else I was going to tell you. Oh yeah, about Chiron. You see, Chiron is having aspects with both the Sun and the Moon in the chart. And Chiron is between, you know, another social planet, so-called, which in the 12th house, I guess, yeah, adds up to the overall picture. Okay, well, I think we are approaching the end. I don't want to hold you. I'm happy to stay a bit longer if you need me to, but how do you want to completed? Any questions or comments you want to make on the previous things and in general?
Can you come back in 5 years' time and tell us anything coming
so.
to and tell us about this child, how she's progressing?
Yes, I would love that. I would love if I'm still in touch with the mother, that I'm still in Valencia and still in touch with you guys, so that we can have another meeting and see were we right in our predictions. But that's not the point, isn't it?
No.
Here, the greatest question is, how do I mean, not tell the mother a lot of concrete things, but rather point her to the potential of the child. Like, one of the most important things I plan telling her is to leave the child as much independence and as much intellectual scope of action as she can possibly do. The parents are very earthly and very watery, both of them. They're very feminine energy people. And they probably would want to stay at home, keep it calm, do those cozy little things. Well, I think this girl will need a lot of intellectual stimulation. She would need to go to see the movie. She would need to go for a walk, to be with lots of other children, to speak, to ask questions, to learn from, just to learn from her environment. And they need to be able to prepare to kind of let her do that and design those ways of doing it, because they themselves will probably not have the energy to do it. So, yeah.
Well, she should be as well creative because of, in the Taurus ascendant maybe, and artistically creative, because in an unusual kind of Picasso sort of way, where they don't, it's not a normal way of being. It's a unique kind of art and things like that.
Where did you come to that conclusion from? I'm curious.
Just Uranus in Taurus. Taurus, most Taurians I know are really creative. I know it's the creative one is supposed to be Leo, but most Taurians I know, they have, as they get older, they become gardeners, and they really are, have the most beautiful gardens. They sow, they decorate, they do, everything is always being beautified with, everything's colour and, and then with this Uranus there as well, it's like it will have a structure to it, but not like a normal, just a flowery art.
Yeah.
A bizarre type of art, maybe.
There is one more pointer to that, which is very, very interesting. Obviously, the ruler Venus of Taurus. Venus is out of bounds in the chart. And you can see this up here. You see where the purple thing is opposite Venus. That means that Venus is in declination more than 23 something, which makes it out of bounds. Out of bounds planets are like Uranian. Nobody knows really what they are, but we suppose that what we know about them is that they act in an unusual way. They're eccentric in one way or another. They can be extremely destructive, or they can be like uncontrollable, or they can be genius. So here, I think we have a double Uranian signature on the Venus, because Uranus is in Taurus on the ascendant, and Venus is out of bounds. So it's like and do they have an aspect? They have a sextile.
Well,
so
that's quite good.
Yeah.
I can't wait to find out.
So it's almost like a story already in your head. Waiting to realize itself. Well, that's what the chart is, and maybe we can finish on that note, that the chart is just a map of the potential, but we never know what the person is going to do with that, and if they're going to manage to only intuitively realize something, because there are so many traps under each one of those aspects and stuff, and even the easy ones. she has so many trines, for example, and they may make her lazy and not active enough. So we don't know, but I'm also curious to see how it goes.
Radulina, I just wanted to ask you a question, because you know the whole being in Valencia and stuff, and I was just interested. I have a cousin who lives there, and he's with a Spanish girl. They had a baby in the Leo time. With the culture, is there a lot of people look at astrology? Is it as popular there as it is here?
Well, actually, honestly, I'm not quite sure I know, because where we are in Valencia, I started there. And I started by inviting people to my house to do talks like this, and totally improvised. And I posted about them in several Facebook groups, which were for expats in Valencia. But that's the thing, they're expats. So I was doing my talks in English, not in Spanish. So even though some Spanish people came, and I now have lots of Spanish friends, and a lot of them are, yes, getting more and more interested. There were a couple of girls that were coming to my talks a couple of years ago, and now they started their own courses, like doing their own courses and stuff. So my personal experience is that especially young people are extremely open to it. I mean, there isn't this like cultural barrier or something like that. But about the elder generation, I'm not sure. They really are quite conservative. In my mind, Jupiter is a very strong force in Spain. It's a very Jupiterian country. And I recently did a talk on Jupiter. If you guys are interested, I can share with you the link, because it's hidden in a playlist. But last week we spoke about Jupiter extensively. And I mentioned there that Spain is such a Jupiterian society. They do kind of everything together. They're very family oriented as well. And it's a little bit of a feeling of being old-fashioned for lots of things. Like England feels so much more modern, so much more advanced. When something new gets introduced, you are guys the first ones to utilize it. Well, there it's a slow motion life kind of thing. And I remember one girl that got very interested in astrology around my age after coming to my talks. And she went back home and shared something with her parents. And they weren't very appreciative. They were very directly, without knowing anything about it, kind of prejudiced. And I think she was joking about it and saying, well, my mother said this and this, and she was laughing at me for doing that. But eventually, she now started a 4-year course in astrology. So we'll see how that goes.
Cool. Oh, thank you so much for a really interesting talk. It's been so nice to meet you and have you talk for us this evening.
It was a pleasure for me.
Been lovely. Yeah. Great.
Feel yourself invited to my talks as well if you're interested. And I've got lots of recordings for free online, so you can explore other things as well if you want.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nice meeting you too.
Definitely keep in touch.
Yes.
Okay.
Lovely.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Goodbye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.